Rebecca had always thought her marriage was strong. She and Mark had been together for nearly 10 years, building a life that looked good from the outside, stable jobs. A quiet home in Oregon, occasional getaways, shared routines. But underneath, cracks had started to form. They rarely laughed anymore, barely touched. And the silence between them at night said more than words ever could. Then one evening, everything shifted. They were sitting in the living room, the fireplace burning low. Mark was unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the flames. Rebecca had just poured them each a glass of wine when he finally spoke. "I've been thinking about something," he said slowly, not looking at her. "Something different." Rebecca tilted her head, unsure of where this was going. "Okay, what is it?" He hesitated. Then, in a voice lower than usual, he said, "I want to see you with someone else." Rebecca blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I want to watch," he said. "I want to see what it's like. To let go, to see you happy again." Her heart skipped. At first, she thought it was a joke, but the seriousness in his face told her it wasn't. Her mind raced. Mark had always been a calm, thoughtful man. This wasn't like him. She asked him why now? Why this? He looked at her, his eyes a strange mix of pain and hope. "Because I miss you. I miss us, I think. Maybe this is a way to break the wall between us." Rebecca sat in stunned silence. The idea sounded wild. Too strange, but also, a part of her listened. A quiet part that had felt distant from Mark for years. She couldn't deny that a longing had been growing inside her, a longing to feel seen, touched, desired. She had buried those feelings under responsibility and routine. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Mark nodded. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. No pressure." That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind wandered to places she hadn't dared go in years. What would it mean for her marriage? For her heart? She wasn't looking for someone else. But the idea of being wanted of, being seen again hit a nerve she didn't expect. Days passed. She didn't bring it up, but the silence between them became charged, full of unspoken thoughts. Then one night after dinner, she walked into the living room and said, "Okay, I'll do it." Mark looked up, surprised. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted, "but I trust you." He gave a soft, unsure smile. "Thank you for even considering it." The next few days were quiet, strange. Mark made arrangements. Nothing rushed, nothing secretive. They talked about boundaries. He promised it wasn't about jealousy. It was about trust, exploration, and a chance to shake something loose between them. She agreed, but her nerves remained. Mark found someone through a friend, a man named Gabriel. He wasn't a stranger, exactly, but not someone Rebecca knew well. Mark said he was respectful, professional, and fully understood the situation. When the day came, Rebecca felt like she was walking through a dream. She dressed carefully, choosing something elegant but modest. She wasn't trying to seduce anyone. She just wanted to feel like herself again. Strong, calm, real. Mark stayed in another room. He said he didn't want to interfere, just to observe quietly. Rebecca walked into the softly lit living room and waited. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a glass of water. Then the door opened. Gabriel walked in with a kind smile, dressed simply in a dark shirt and jeans. His presence was calm, grounded. He greeted her politely, almost too politely, and asked if she was okay. She nodded, though she didn't know if she meant it. They sat on the couch, both stiff at first. He spoke gently, asking about her day, her work, what she liked to read. The conversation was light, simple, but oddly comforting. Slowly, her shoulders relaxed. She wasn't expecting to laugh, but she did. Just once, a small, real laugh at a comment Gabriel made about how awkward this all was. "It feels like a weird first date in a movie," he said, grinning. Rebecca laughed again, surprised by the sound of it. From the other room, Mark heard it too. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room faded. Rebecca didn't know what she was feeling: excitement, fear. Maybe both. But she knew one thing for sure. She hadn't felt this alive in a long time. Gabriel wasn't pushy. He didn't touch her. He just listened. And Rebecca, for the first time in years, felt like someone saw her not as a wife, not as a role, but as a woman. A human being with thoughts, desires, and emotions. At some point, she looked toward the hallway, knowing Mark was there, watching. She wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling. But then Gabriel asked another question, and she turned back, drawn into the moment again. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. There was no physical line crossed, but emotionally, Rebecca knew she had walked into unfamiliar territory. And strangely, she wasn't ashamed. She was curious about herself, about her marriage, about what this meant. When Gabriel stood to leave, he shook her hand gently. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting this moment." She nodded, her heart racing as he walked out. Rebecca stood alone in the quiet room, unsure of what had just happened. She had expected discomfort, maybe regret. But what she felt instead was warmth. Then she heard Mark's voice from the hallway. "Rebecca." She turned slowly. He stepped into the light, looking at her carefully. She didn't know what he saw in her eyes, but she could tell, just by his face, that he hadn't expected her to enjoy it that much, and neither had she. The next morning, the house was quiet. Rebecca woke early, her mind still spinning from the night before. The soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains, but nothing about the day felt normal. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, hands wrapped around the mug, staring at nothing. Mark came downstairs later, slower than usual. His face was unreadable, tired, and serious. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "How do you feel?" Rebecca looked up, unsure how to answer. "Different," she said honestly. "I thought I'd feel guilty or ashamed, but I don't." Mark nodded slowly. "I saw you smile last night, in a way I haven't seen in years." His words hurt and warmed her at the same time. It was true. That spark, that lightness, it had been missing from her life. And last night, even in that strange situation, something inside her had awakened. "I didn't plan to enjoy it," she said. "But Gabriel was kind. He listened. He made me feel seen." Mark looked down at his coffee. "That's what scares me." Rebecca felt a weight in her chest. She reached for his hand across the table. "I didn't fall in love with him. I just remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be interesting." Mark didn't pull his hand away. "I thought this would bring us closer," he said quietly. "But now I'm not sure." She squeezed his fingers gently. "It can, if we're honest about what we need." The day passed slowly. They stayed home, speaking softly, moving around each other with care. There was no anger, no yelling, just an uncomfortable tenderness between two people facing a truth they hadn't wanted to see. Their marriage had been coasting, quiet and polite, but lacking something deep. Later that afternoon, Mark stood in the doorway of Rebecca's studio, watching her clean up old paintbrushes. She turned when she noticed him, surprised. "I miss your art," he said. "You used to paint every weekend." "I stopped when I felt like nothing I made mattered anymore." Mark stepped inside, picking up a dusty sketchbook. "Maybe this experience reminded you that you matter." Rebecca nodded, surprised by how gently he said it. "It reminded me of who I was before life got small." Mark looked at her. "And who are you now?" She didn't have an answer. That night, Mark suggested they go for a drive. No destination, just a quiet road through the hills. They didn't speak much, just listened to the hum of the engine and watched the sun dip behind the trees. After a while, Mark pulled over at an overlook. They sat in silence, watching the sky fade to soft blue. "I was jealous," he said finally, "but not of him, of the version of you that came alive." Rebecca looked at him with wet eyes. "That version has always been here. I just didn't feel safe enough to be her." He turned toward her, voice cracking. "I want to be the man who makes you feel safe, who brings you back to life." She reached out and touched his cheek. "Then don't shut down now. We can rebuild this." If we're both willing. They drove home in silence, but the air between them felt less heavy. Something was opening painfully, slowly, but it was real. Over the next few days, things shifted. Mark asked more questions, not to accuse, but to understand. Rebecca answered honestly, even when the truth was hard. She admitted she had felt invisible, lonely, unappreciated. Not unloved, just unseen. Mark listened, really listened. For the first time in a long time, one evening, while folding laundry together, Mark said something that stopped her cold. What if Gabriel wasn't the end of this? What if he was the beginning of us learning what we've been missing? Rebecca looked at him, surprised. You'd be okay with more? I don't know, he said, but I'd rather explore this with you than pretend we're okay when we're not. She nodded slowly. I don't want to chase excitement. I want connection. Real, deep connection with you. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Then let's keep talking. No secrets. No hiding. And they did. Every night after dinner, they sat on the couch and talked about their past, their fears, their hopes. They didn't always agree. Sometimes the conversations ended in silence, sometimes in tears. But they were real. Rebecca didn't see Gabriel again. It hadn't been about him. He was just the mirror that reflected back what she was missing. What they were missing. Instead of chasing more outside of their marriage, Rebecca and Mark began building something new inside it. They started dating again, walks, dinners, long talks in coffee shops. Mark even bought her a new set of paints and encouraged her to start creating again. One morning, Rebecca found a note on her pillow. It was from Mark. Simple words, but they hit deep. I see you. I hear you. I love you. Let's keep finding each other. Tears filled her eyes as she held the note close. They weren't healed, not yet. But they were willing, and that was enough to start again. The days after their honest talks brought a new energy into Rebecca and Mark's life. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, no fireworks or grand declarations, but a quiet reawakening. They began to notice the little things again. The way Mark's hand brushed against Rebecca's as they passed in the kitchen. The soft smiles shared across the breakfast table. Slowly, the walls they had built around themselves began to crumble. Rebecca returned to her painting with passion. Every brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost in the weight of their marriage's routine. Mark watched with pride, sitting beside her at the small studio table, offering gentle encouragement without pressure. Sometimes he'd glance at her and see that familiar spark in her eyes, a spark he had feared extinguished forever. One chilly evening, Mark surprised Rebecca with tickets to a small art exhibit downtown. It was nothing extravagant, just a quiet way to show he cared. They walked hand in hand through the gallery, surrounded by paintings and sculptures that spoke of passion and creativity. For the first time in months, they talked about their dreams again. Mark shared his long-forgotten desire to write a novel, something he had shelved to focus on work. Rebecca listened intently, excited by the idea of this new chapter. That night, driving home under a sky full of stars, Mark reached over and took Rebecca's hand. I want to be part of your world, he said simply. Not just your husband, but your partner in everything. Rebecca squeezed his hand back, heart swelling with hope. I want that too. Despite the renewed closeness, the past still lingered quietly between them. Rebecca sometimes caught herself wondering if Mark really understood how lonely she had felt, or if he was simply trying to patch a fragile surface. Mark, on his side, battled his own fears. What if this closeness was temporary? What if they fell back into silence and coldness again? One afternoon, they sat in the living room, sunlight pouring through the windows. Rebecca brought up something that had been on her mind. Last week, when Gabriel was here, I realized it wasn't about him. It was about me wanting to feel alive again. Mark nodded slowly. I think I was scared. Scared that I wasn't enough for you? She reached out, touching his face gently. You are. But I needed to remind both of us that we have to keep choosing each other. From then on, they made small promises. No phones at dinner. more time for conversation, intentional moments to connect. They began sharing their fears and hopes openly without judgment. One night, Mark cooked dinner, something he rarely did. The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary, a warmth spreading through the house. Rebecca set the table, smiling at the effort. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and each other's company. After dinner, they settled on the couch, close but not yet touching. Mark reached out hesitantly and took Rebecca's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like a language they had forgotten but still knew. The night grew deeper, the silence between them no longer heavy but full of possibility. Mark looked into Rebecca's eyes and saw the vulnerability and strength there. She saw the same in him, the man who had loved her quietly through years of distance, now trying to bridge the gap. They talked softly about the past, about mistakes made and lessons learned. Rebecca admitted she had sometimes felt invisible, like a shadow in her own life. Mark confessed how his fears of losing her had made him shut down. "I want to be better," he said, "for you." "For us," Rebecca nodded, tears welling. "Me too." Slowly, carefully, they moved closer. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people rediscovering each other's touch, learning again how to be close. That night was the first time in a long while they slept in the same bed without distance between them. Mark held Rebecca gently, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It felt safe. It felt right. Days turned into weeks. The awkwardness faded, replaced by a tenderness that grew stronger. They found comfort in simple rituals: morning coffee shared on the porch, evening walks through the neighborhood, quiet moments reading side by side. Rebecca began to open up more about her dreams. She talked about wanting to teach art to children, to inspire others the way she had once been inspired. Mark encouraged her every step, offering support and ideas. At work, Mark also made changes. He found more time for creative writing, carving out mornings to put words on paper before the day's demands took over. He shared snippets with Rebecca, who listened with pride. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park watching children play, Mark surprised her with a small wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. "For your art ideas," he said. "For everything you want to create." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." They kissed softly, the kind of kiss that spoke of new beginnings and unspoken promises. Yet, even in this growing closeness, challenges remained. Both knew healing wasn't linear. There were moments of doubt, fears resurfacing like shadows. Sometimes past wounds ached in the quiet. One evening, after a long day, Rebecca admitted she still felt scared. "What if we lose this again?" Mark pulled her close. "Then we'll fight for it. Every day. Together." Their renewed connection wasn't perfect, but it was honest. They were learning to trust again, to be vulnerable without fear. The house that once felt cold and empty now held warmth. It echoed with laughter, conversation, and the quiet sound of two people choosing each other. Rebecca and Mark's story was not about perfection, but about resilience. About the courage to face hard truths, to step into unknown emotional territory, and to rebuild a love that had been tested but not broken. And as they held each other close that night, with the city lights twinkling outside their window, both knew this was just the beginning. A new chapter written not with grand gestures, but with quiet, steady love. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding for Rebecca and Mark. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth. But every day, they chose each other again. The old walls of silence and distance were slowly replaced by trust and understanding. Rebecca's art flourished. She began teaching weekend classes at a local community center, sharing her passion with children who reminded her of the young girl she once was, curious, hopeful, eager to create. Mark was her biggest supporter, often sitting in the back of the room watching her connect with her students. He saw a new light in her eyes, one that filled him with pride and relief. Their home felt alive again. They filled it with laughter, with music, with shared meals and quiet nights. They celebrated small victories, a completed painting, a new poem Mark wrote, a weekend spent just walking and talking. But the real test came when life's challenges crept back in. Work pressures, family demands, and everyday stresses threatened to pull them apart. Old fears tried to resurface, the fear of being alone, the fear of losing the love they had fought so hard to regain. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Rebecca sat on the porch steps, head in her hands. Mark joined her quietly, sitting close but giving her space. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "I'm scared, Mark. What if this all falls apart again?" He took her hand gently. "I'm scared too. But we can't let fear control us. We have to keep talking, keep being honest. That's how we'll stay strong." Rebecca nodded, feeling the truth in his words. They promised to never stop communicating, no matter how hard it got. Their commitment wasn't just about saving their marriage, it was about growing together, learning to be partners in every sense, not just in name. They found new ways to connect: regular date nights, weekend trips to quiet places, even silly things like cooking a new recipe together or watching old movies. One chilly autumn afternoon, they took a drive to a nearby lake. The trees were fiery reds and golds, the air crisp and fresh. They sat on a bench by the water, wrapped in a shared blanket. Watching the sun dip below the horizon, Mark looked at Rebecca. His eyes filled with warmth. "I never stopped loving you," he said softly. "Even when we were lost, even when I didn't know how to show it." Rebecca smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you too, and I'm ready to keep building this, no matter what." The lake was quiet, except for the soft sounds of water and wind. It felt like a promise that even after storms, there could be peace. Back home, they faced difficult conversations about boundaries, about past mistakes, about the future. But now those talks didn't break them. They brought them closer. Rebecca stopped thinking of her time with Gabriel as a betrayal and began seeing it as a turning point. A moment that forced her to face what she needed and speak her truth. Mark no longer saw it as a threat, but as a chance to understand her better. Together, they rewrote their story. A story not of blame or regret, but of growth, forgiveness, and hope. Their love became something quiet and strong. Not loud or dramatic, but steady and real. They learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply choosing each other every day, through the hard times and the good. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Mark surprised Rebecca with a small box. Inside was a simple ring, not a new engagement, but a symbol of their renewed commitment. "I want to keep choosing you," he said. "Not because I have to, but because I want to." Rebecca's eyes glistened with tears. "I choose you too. Every day." They held each other close, knowing the road ahead would still have bumps. But now they had a foundation strong enough to hold them, built on honesty, trust, and a love reborn from the ashes of heartbreak. Their story was far from perfect, but it was theirs. A story of two people who lost their way, found each other again, and dared to believe in a new beginning. And as they looked forward, hand in hand, they knew that, whatever came next, they would face it together. Lauren Bennett lived a life that looked perfect from the outside. At 34, she had a good job as a marketing coordinator in Seattle, a charming craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood, and a husband who had always been good to her. Ben, her husband of 9 years, was steady, loyal, and kind. He cooked dinner when she worked late, remembered to warm her car on cold mornings, and texted her sweet reminders like "pick up milk" or "love you, drive safe." There was comfort in their routine. But lately, that comfort had begun to feel like a slow fade, like something vital inside her had gone quiet. She hadn't told anyone how lost she felt, not even her closest friends. She smiled through get-togethers, answered "I'm fine" when asked, and convinced herself that being content was enough. But content wasn't the same as happy. Somewhere along the way, life had become flat, predictable, like watching a movie she already knew the ending to. Then, something unexpected happened. her best friend Sarah signed them both up for a weekend creative writing workshop. "You used to love writing," Sarah said. "Maybe you just need to wake that part of you up again." Lauren hadn't written since her 20s. It used to be her dream to be an author, to tell stories that made people feel something. But life got busy. She met Ben, work took over. Slowly, the dream got pushed to the side, then boxed away entirely. So when she walked into the downtown Seattle event space for the workshop, she didn't expect much, just a quiet day to herself. She didn't expect Ethan. He was the guest speaker, a published author in his mid-30s. Tall, relaxed, with dark eyes that seemed to hold a story of their own. His voice was calm but full of passion as he spoke about writing with honesty. About pulling truth from the parts of yourself you usually hide. The best writing, he said, is when you stop pretending and just let the truth breathe. Lauren watched him, something stirring in her. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. He reminded her of who she used to be, of the version of herself that still wanted more, still believed there was beauty in risk. When the workshop ended, most people left quickly, but Lauren stayed behind to thank him. She kept it brief, just a few words. But Ethan smiled at her like he genuinely appreciated it. That evening, Lauren went home to her usual life, Ben making pasta in the kitchen. The soft hum of a sports game on TV. Everything was the same. But she wasn't. Her mind kept drifting back to Ethan's words. Stop pretending. Let the truth breathe. She lay awake that night, not thinking about Ethan exactly, but thinking about herself. When was the last time she felt excited? Not safe, not comfortable excited. When had she last done something brave? Something just for herself? The next day, she received an email from the writing group. They were hosting a smaller follow-up session the next weekend. Ethan would be leading it. She almost deleted it. She had chores to do, errands, a weekend with Ben. But her finger hovered over the delete button, and then didn't press it. The next Saturday, Lauren found herself back in that same room. This time, there were only about 15 people. Ethan spotted her and smiled in recognition. "Glad you came back," he said. They talked briefly during the break about writing favorite books, what inspired them. It wasn't flirtatious, just easy. He asked her if she was writing anything now. She hesitated, then admitted she hadn't written in years. "Start," he said simply. "You still have something to say." She left with a strange energy in her chest. That night, while Ben watched a movie in the living room, Lauren sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and opened a blank document. Words didn't pour out, but something began. Just a few paragraphs. A scene, a feeling. A character who had been stuck inside her finally found her voice the next week. Lauren emailed Ethan. She attached her short piece and asked for feedback. He responded kindly, thoughtfully. "You write with feeling," he said. "It's raw." "That's good." Their emails continued, always about writing, always respectful. But underneath, Lauren knew she looked forward to them more than she should. Ben didn't notice the change at first. If anything, he seemed relieved she had found a new hobby. "You seem lighter lately," he said, handing her a cup of coffee one morning. Lauren smiled, guilt catching in her throat. "Just needed to wake up a little, I guess." But what she didn't say was that something else had woken up to an ache she hadn't felt in years. A longing she couldn't explain. Not just for Ethan, but for herself, for the woman she had buried under years of being careful. Responsible, safe. One evening, Ethan invited her to a public book signing he was doing at a local bookstore. It wasn't personal, not really. He said she might enjoy meeting other writers. She told Ben she was going to dinner with Sarah at the bookstore. Ethan lit up when he saw her. Not in a dramatic way, just a warm, honest smile that made her stomach flip. They didn't talk long during the event, but after, as people trickled out, they ended up standing near the entrance together, chatting about everything and nothing. The sky had darkened outside. Rain fell in soft sheets against the windows. "I don't usually come to things like this," Lauren admitted. "I'm glad you did," Ethan said. "You look different tonight." Lauren blinked. Different how? Lighter. Like something in use waking up. She didn't know what to say. Her heart beat faster. I should go, she said softly. Yeah, he nodded. Take care, Lauren. She turned and left, her footsteps echoing behind her. She didn't look back, but she could feel his eyes on her. When she got home, Ben was asleep on the couch. She sat beside him, watching him for a moment. His face was peaceful, familiar. She didn't touch him. Didn't wake him. Instead, she went to bed, eyes open, heart racing. Torn between the life she had and the part of her that had just begun to come alive again. Lauren didn't plan to cross a line. But the risk was already in motion the week after the bookstore event. Lauren found herself thinking about Ethan more often than she expected. It wasn't a simple crush, but a strange mix of admiration and curiosity. Every time her phone buzzed with a new email from him, she felt a small flutter in her chest. Their messages were mostly about writing techniques, story ideas, encouragement, but beneath the words, something unspoken seemed to connect them. It was as if Ethan saw a side of Lauren that even she had forgotten. Ben noticed the change. Lauren was quieter at breakfast, distracted at work, and sometimes smiled to herself like she was holding a secret. He asked if something was wrong. She shook her head, telling him she was just tired. He believed her, but a part of him wondered if she was pulling away. Lauren's life became a delicate balancing act. She didn't want to hurt Benny, had been nothing but kind and loving. But the spark she felt around Ethan was new and confusing. At work, she found herself writing scenes about characters caught between loyalty and desire. It was as if her heart was exploring emotions she had locked away. When the writing group invited her to a casual meetup at a cafe downtown, she hesitated but decided to go. Ethan was there. The room was filled with writers sharing ideas and stories, laughter blending with the aroma of coffee. Ethan greeted her with a smile that felt warm and genuine, not flirtatious. They slipped into conversation easily, sharing thoughts on favorite authors and how writing was sometimes like therapy, Lauren told Ethan about the story she was working Anna, woman struggling to find herself again after years of routine. Ethan listened carefully, then said, "It's brave to dig deep like that. Most people never try." His words stayed with her. After the meetup, Ethan walked her to the bus stop. The evening air was cool, the city lights shimmering behind them. They talked about small things, their favorite movies, places they wanted to visit. It was simple, but the connection grew stronger. Lauren felt seen, heard, like she was more than just a wife or a worker bee. Back at home, the quiet between her and Ben felt heavier. She longed to share this new part of herself, but feared what it might mean. Ben was waiting for her, the same man she married, yet she felt worlds apart. Lauren's emails with Ethan continued. Sometimes he sent her links to poems or articles about writing. Other times he simply asked how she was doing. Their conversations became a small refuge in her busy life. One afternoon, Lauren sat by the window reading Ethan's latest message. He praised her recent writing attempt, encouraging her to trust her instincts. The kindness in his words made her heart ache with longing, not just for him, but for the person she once was and hoped to become again. She realized she was risking something precious. She was stepping into feelings she had promised herself she'd never explore. But the pull was too strong to resist at work. Her mind wandered. Meetings blurred, deadlines approached. But her thoughts were with Ethan. She wondered if he felt the same pull, or if she was imagining it all. Was this just a harmless distraction, or the beginning of something that could change everything? One evening, Ben came home early. He looked tired but smiled when he saw her. They ate dinner in comfortable silence, but Lauren's heart was heavy. She wanted to tell him about Ethan, to confess the way she felt alive again. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached out and held Ben's hand across the table. He squeezed it gently, not knowing the storm inside her days later. Ethan invited her to a small, private reading he was hosting for local writers. It wasn't publicized. Just a quiet gathering in a cozy room filled with soft light and the scent of old books. Lauren told Ben she was meeting Sarah for dinner. Ben nodded, trusting her. He wanted to believe she was happy, that she had found something to brighten her days. At the reading, Lauren felt a rush of excitement mixed with nerves. Ethan's voice filled the room as he read from his new novel words about loss, hope, and the risk of loving when it hurts. Afterward, they talked quietly. Ethan complimented her writing, and Lauren felt warmth spread through her chest. "You've changed," Ethan said softly. "You're glowing." Lauren smiled, unsure what to say. She wanted to tell him everything, the loneliness, the doubts, the fear of what might happen. But instead, she whispered, "I don't know what's happening to me." Ethan reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, respectful. "I'm here," he said. "Whatever you need." For a moment, the world outside that small room disappeared. There was only the two of them, caught between what was real and what might be. Lauren pulled away, guilt and longing swirling inside her. She knew she had to be careful to keep her life intact. But the feelings were real, and the risk was becoming harder to ignore. She left the reading with a mix of hope and fear. As she walked to her car, the rain started to fall softly, washing away the doubts for just a little while. Back home, Ben was waiting. He kissed her forehead and asked about her night. Lauren smiled but said little. That night, as she lay in bed, Lauren's thoughts raced. She was caught between two worlds, the safety of her marriage and the thrill of something new and unknown. She didn't know where this path would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. She had taken a risk she never expected to take. And there was no turning back now. After the private reading, Lauren's world felt charged with tension she couldn't explain. Each day her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and desire. The emails from Ethan kept coming, kind, encouraging, filled with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. He never crossed any obvious line, but every message hinted at something deeper. Something unspoken. Lauren kept her distance from Ben, but the gap between them seemed to widen. He was busy with work, and she was busy with her restless heart. She missed the simplicity of their early days, but was afraid to admit she needed more. More passion, more excitement, more herself. One Friday evening, Ethan invited Lauren to a book signing at a small independent bookstore in Seattle. It was a public event, and she told Ben she was meeting Sarah for dinner. Ben smiled, assuming it was just another night out with friends. At the bookstore, the atmosphere was lively but cozy. People shuffled in and out, buying books and chatting. Ethan noticed Lauren the moment she arrived and gave her a warm, genuine smile. They talked briefly before the signing began, exchanging small stories and laughter. After the event, rain began to fall softly. Lauren felt the weight of the secret she was carrying more than ever. The risk she had taken letting herself feel something outside of her marriage had opened a quiet but powerful crack in her world. She knew she couldn't keep living in this half-truth. Something had to give. Ben noticed her distance. His eyes searched for answers in the small silences. In the way she avoided his touch, in the way her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. He didn't say much, but his worry was clear. One evening, after dinner, he asked gently, "Lauren, is everything okay? You seem far away." Lauren's heart raced. The moment she had avoided for weeks had finally come. She took a deep breath, willing herself to be honest. "Ben, I've been feeling lost lately. I've been holding back parts of myself, and I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." Ben reached across the table and took her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll get through it." She looked at him, grateful and scared all at once. "I met someone," she said quietly. "It's not physical, nothing happened, but I let myself feel something I wasn't supposed to." Ben's face tightened for a moment, but he nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." Lauren told him about Ethan, the writing group, the emails, the moments when she felt alive again. Ben listened without interruption, absorbing every word. It was hard for him, but he appreciated her honesty. They spent the rest of the night talking, laying their feelings bare. They weren't perfect, and the road ahead wasn't clear. But for the first time in months, they connected in a way that felt real. Lauren realized that the risk she took wasn't just about a feeling outside her marriage, was about risking honesty, risking vulnerability. And that risk had started something important. In the weeks that followed, Lauren and Ben went to counseling together. They worked to rebuild trust and to find the excitement that had once brought them together. Lauren kept writing, but now it was different. It was healing. Not hiding, Ethan remained a part of her story, but as a friend who helped her rediscover herself rather than a secret to hide. Lauren understood that real love wasn't just about passion. It was about choosing to face the hard truths together. One afternoon, Lauren sat at her desk, typing a news story inspired by everything she'd learned, the pain, the hope, the courage to risk. Her heart was full, not because life was perfect, but because she was finally living it honestly.